Welcome to night 19 to fall asleep fast. This is a quiet place where you don't need to focus, remember, or do anything at all. You can simply listen or let the sound fade gently into the background. If it feels right, you can softly like this video now or leave a calm comment sharing where you're listening from and what time it is. There's no need to rush. Everything here moves slowly. Tonight, we explore the forgotten 18th century obsession with training squirrels as household pets. A calm and unhurried story from the past, told gently, without urgency and without expectation. You don't need to stay awake for it. You don't need to follow every detail. If you were here last night, welcome back. And if this is your first night, you can begin right here, exactly as you are. A new night will be waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, allow your breathing to slow, your thoughts to drift, and let this story quietly carry you toward rest. Evening settled over the town without haste. The light did not disappear all at once, but withdrew gradually from rooftops and upper windows, leaving behind a dim blue trace that lingered along the horizon. Inside the houses, another kind of light began to take its place. Candles were lit one by one, their small flames steady and deliberate, reflecting softly in panes of glass and in the polished surfaces of furniture that had been rubbed smooth by years of careful hands. Rooms in the late 18th century carried a quiet weight. Walnut tables stood firmly upon wooden floors, their dark grain catching the glow of wax candles. Chairs upholstered in muted fabrics were arranged with intention, not crowded, but placed where conversation or solitary reading might unfold without disturbance. Curtains, thick and textured, framed tall windows that now held the fading sky. The air held a faint mixture of beeswax, polished wood, and the distant trace of evening air drifting in through narrow openings. The drawing room was often the heart of the house at this hour. It was not a grand space in every home, but even modest interiors bore the marks of care. A writing desk might stand near the window, its surface arranged with folded letters and a small inkwell. Shelves held a measured number of books, their spines worn softly along the edges. On a side table, porcelain cups rested upon saucers, long emptied of tea but not yet returned to the kitchen. Nothing felt hurried. Objects remained where they had last been placed, as though the day itself had exhaled and come to rest. Candlelight altered the proportions of the room. Corners softened. Shadows gathered along the baseboards and behind chair legs, not as something ominous, but as a natural companion to flame. The ceiling seemed higher in the dimness, the walls less defined. In this gentle light, even the smallest movement gained presence. A curtain stirred slightly. A floorboard gave a quiet response beneath a careful step. The house spoke in small sounds, familiar and unremarkable. Such interiors were shaped not only by taste but by rhythm. Mornings carried a different tone, filled with practical tasks and open windows. Afternoons welcomed visitors or correspondence. But evenings, especially in the colder months, drew the household inward. Hands found work that could be done by candlelight. Mending, reading, sorting through small collections of objects gathered over years. There was time to observe the room itself, to notice how the flame leaned when a door opened, or how the wood of the table reflected a thin line of light along its edge. In these quiet hours, habits took form without announcement. A bowl might be set upon the windowsill to cool. A scrap of fruit or a few shelled nuts could remain upon a plate after supper, forgotten or deliberately left aside. Windows, though latched, did not always close tightly against the night. The boundary between inside and outside was firm in structure, yet soft in sensation. Cool air slipped through unseen gaps, brushing against fabric and flame alike. Outside, trees stood in orderly gardens or along narrow streets. Their branches, though no longer bright with summer leaves, retained a delicate network of lines against the dim sky. In daylight, these trees were part of the landscape beyond the home. In evening they seemed nearer, their silhouettes pressed against the glass. The interior and the natural world did not feel entirely separate. They existed in quiet conversation, divided by little more than wood and pain. The arrangement of furniture reflected a desire for both order and comfort. Tables were not merely surfaces but stages for daily life. A folded shawl might rest upon the back of a chair. A small brass candlestick stood near the center of a desk, its wax slowly bending at the edge. The grain of walnut, dark and gently curved, carried within it the memory of the tree from which it had come. Though shaped by tools and polished to shine, it retained a subtle suggestion of forest within its pattern. It was within such rooms that curiosity found a place to settle. The 18th century held an interest in the natural world that extended beyond fields and forests. Specimens were collected, observed, and arranged. Cabinets of curiosities stood in some homes, holding shells, stones, dried plants, and other fragments of distant landscapes. Even in households without such collections, there lingered a quiet attentiveness to small living things. Birds glimpsed at the edge of a garden, insects resting along a windowsill, the rustle of leaves beyond the glass. Yet the evening did not announce these interests openly. They emerged gradually in the placement of objects and the openness of a window. A narrow ledge beneath the glass might serve more than a decorative purpose. Its wooden surface, worn smooth by years of contact, offered a resting place for whatever paused there. The candlelight reached only part way toward it, leaving the far edge in a soft gradient between brightness and shadow. The household moved within this atmosphere with measured steps. There was no need for haste once the day's obligations had quieted. A chair was drawn slightly closer to the hearth. A hand brushed lightly across the table to gather crumbs into the palm. A door remained ajar, not fully closed, allowing the faintest thread of cooler air to pass through. The room held space not only for its inhabitants but for small, unplanned presences. It was easy in such conditions for the outside to lean gently inward. A branch extended near enough to the window to cast a trembling shadow across the wall. The scent of damp earth after rain slipped through unseen openings. The distinction between the cultivated garden and the ordered parlor felt less absolute in the half-light. Both were arranged spaces, shaped by intention, yet both carried within them something that could not be entirely contained. The candle flames burned lower as time passed. Their light grew warmer, more golden, settling heavily upon surfaces. The walnut table, once sharply defined, softened at its edges. The lace curtain near the window became a pale silhouette, its pattern faintly visible only where moonlight touched it. The room seemed to wait, not for anything specific, but in the way a space can feel receptive without expectation. On the windowsill, a few small fragments lay unnoticed. A crumb, a fragment of shell, the faintest trace of scent carried from earlier in the day. The glass reflected the interior like a dim mirror, overlaying the night beyond with the shapes of chairs and shelves. If something were to move along that ledge, it would first appear as a shadow against shadow, a slight interruption of stillness. But for now the room remained composed. The air held its quiet balance between warmth and coolness. The objects within it seemed settled into their places, as though aware that evening had deepened into night. In this steady glow of walnut and wax, the house offered itself as a shelter not only for those who dwelled within it, but for smaller lives that might approach without ceremony. The window stood as a threshold, neither fully open nor entirely closed. Beyond it, branches traced patient lines across the sky. Within it, the candlelight flickered softly, casting a path of illumination toward the sill. It was along this quiet boundary between the ordered interior and the living world outside that the first delicate movements would soon be noticed, not as intrusion, but as something almost natural, as though the room itself had made space for a lighter step to pause beside the lace. Along the quiet boundary of the window ledge, where moonlight rested in a pale band across the wood, a small shape began to take form against the stillness. It was not a sudden arrival nor a disturbance of the room's calm, but rather a continuation of it. A slight shift of weight, a soft placement of paws upon the sill, and the outside had leaned inward just enough to be noticed. The squirrel's body seemed composed of motion even while still. Its fur, muted in the dim light, carried shades of brown and gray that blended easily with the grain of the wood. The curve of its back echoed the gentle arch of the window frame. For a moment it paused, nose lifted, sensing the faint traces of warmth and scent drifting from within. The room did not resist its presence. The candle flames flickered in their steady rhythm, casting a faint shimmer along the glass. In many homes of the 18th century, such visits were not entirely unexpected. Gardens pressed closely against walls, and trees were often planted near enough that branches nearly brushed the upper panes. The architecture of the house, though solid, did not seal itself completely from the natural world. Small openings remained where air and scent might pass. The window ledge served as both barrier and invitation, a narrow threshold where curiosity could settle without fully crossing into either realm. At first, the squirrel's appearances were brief. It would cling lightly to the outer frame, its claws finding small holds in the wood, before retreating again to the branch from which it had come. Yet familiarity grows quietly. A crumb left near the sill, a fragment of nut shell forgotten after supper, offered small encouragements. Over time, the distance between branch and ledge shortened, until the animal lingered longer in the softened glow of candlelight. Within the room, objects retained their quiet arrangement. A porcelain bowl rested upon a side table, its pale surface reflecting a narrow crescent of flame. Folded letters lay undisturbed beside an inkwell, their edges casting fine shadows. The squirrel's movement among these items was light and exploratory. It would advance a few steps, pause, tilt its head, and listen. The floorboards did not protest beneath such a slight weight. The air seemed to hold its breath without tension. In certain households, these visits gradually shifted from chance encounters to something more deliberate. The presence of a small creature within the domestic sphere carried a subtle charm. It was neither livestock nor entirely wild, but something that hovered gently between categories. Children might watch from a distance, their movements restrained by quiet instruction. Adults observed with a composed curiosity, noting the animal's habits, its preferred paths along the furniture, its careful avoidance of sudden sounds. The squirrel's route often traced a delicate map of the room. From the window ledge to the back of a chair, from there to the edge of a table, and finally to the floor where crumbs might be found. Its tail balanced each movement, rising and settling like a soft plume. The lace curtain, stirred by the faintest draft, occasionally brushed against its fur, leaving no mark but a brief ripple in the fabric. There was a patience in these encounters. The animal did not fully trust the interior at first, and the household did not seek to startle it into retreat. Time performed the greater part of the work. Evenings passed with small repetitions. A bowl placed slightly nearer to the window. A hand resting calmly upon a table rather than reaching too quickly. The rhythm of candlelight remained constant, offering a familiar warmth against the cool of the glass. Gradually, the squirrel's visits extended beyond the ledge. It ventured farther into the room, drawn perhaps by the steady availability of food, or by the absence of threat. Its paws touched the polished surface of walnut tables, leaving no trace but the softest suggestion of movement. The grain of the wood seemed to welcome such light contact, as though remembering its own origin in forest soil and filtered sunlight. The domestic interior began to accommodate this presence in subtle ways. Curtains were sometimes tied back to allow freer passage. Windows were opened slightly during mild evenings, reducing the barrier between branch and chair. A small dish, once used for fruit, might be repurposed to hold nuts. These changes were neither announced nor recorded with ceremony. They emerged from habit, from a quiet willingness to share space. Visitors, when present, occasionally remarked upon the sight of a squirrel perched upon a mantel or darting along a shelf. Yet the tone remained restrained. There was no need for spectacle. The animal's movements were too swift and delicate to dominate the room. Instead, they threaded through it, weaving a small current of life among heavier furnishings and steady candlelight. In some homes, the squirrel grew accustomed enough to human proximity that it would approach a seated figure without immediate retreat. It might pause upon the arm of a chair, nose twitching as it assessed the scent of wool or silk. A hand extended slowly, palm open, offering a fragment of nut. The gesture was patient, unforced. Whether accepted or declined, it marked a gentle narrowing of distance between species. The presence of such a creature altered the perception of the room itself. Spaces that once seemed fixed and orderly acquired a subtle unpredictability. A book left slightly open might bear the faint imprint of small claws along its edge. A folded cloth might shift imperceptibly from its previous position. These were not disruptions but reminders that the household contained more than furniture and flame. Outside, the branches remained within reach, offering the option of return at any moment. The squirrel's allegiance was not absolute. It belonged still to the trees, to the open air and shifting light. Yet the interior provided something different: steady warmth, consistent nourishment, and a landscape of surfaces that invited exploration. The line between wild and domestic thinned, not through force but through repetition. As evenings lengthened and the visits became more regular, observation turned gently toward understanding. Patterns emerged. The squirrel favored certain hours, often arriving as dusk deepened and candlelight grew most pronounced. It displayed preferences for particular foods, ignoring some offerings while accepting others. These details were noted not in formal record, but in memory and quiet adjustment. The window ledge, once merely a resting place for cooling bowls or folded fabric, transformed into a meeting point. It held the trace of pause as often as the reflection of flame. The glass above it carried faint smudges where nose or fur had brushed against its surface. The room, without changing its fundamental character, had made room for a smaller life within its boundaries. In time, the question of chance gave way to a quieter intention. If a squirrel could linger so calmly among chairs and tables, perhaps it could be encouraged to remain longer still. The thought did not arise as ambition, but as a natural extension of what had already begun. A creature that moved so lightly across the threshold might, with patience, come to rest more fully within the home. The ledge remained the place of first contact, bathed in the mingled glow of moonlight and wax. Yet from that narrow strip of wood, the possibility of a more deliberate companionship began to take shape, resting quietly in the space between branch and table, between instinct and invitation. Evening deepened its quiet hold over the household. The candles on tables and mantels burned lower, their golden light softening the edges of every object in the room. Against this gentle glow, the presence of small creatures, already familiar to the household, began to extend beyond mere observation. The squirrel that had once paused lightly upon the window ledge now ventured closer, drawn by an unhurried rhythm that mirrored the movements of those within the room. Every gesture, every step, was tempered by patience, as though the household and its visitor had learned the subtle language of stillness together. Hands that might once have brushed across a table in haste now lingered for the smallest measure of time. A fragment of nut was offered deliberately, not with expectation, but as a quiet invitation. The squirrel approached, senses attuned to the calm atmosphere, its small paws testing the surface lightly before settling. The polished wood of the table, the soft fabric of the chair, the gentle draft moving through the curtains. All of it became part of an unspoken dialogue, each element contributing to a growing trust. The process was gradual. No command was given, no sudden movements disturbed the delicate balance of light and shadow. Instead, repetition emerged naturally. Evening after evening, small offerings appeared in familiar places. The squirrel learned without notice to accept them. It moved with careful deliberation, following patterns that had quietly been established, guided by the soft presence of those around it. Each step into the interior was taken with confidence born of familiarity, yet it remained light, almost ephemeral in its motion. The household itself adapted with similar care. Furniture was left slightly rearranged, a chair drawn forward just enough to create a path, a bowl placed near the edge of the table so the visitor could reach it without strain. Nothing was abrupt, nothing out of place. Every adjustment respected the slow rhythm that had settled over the space. The candlelight flickered over walnut surfaces, casting gentle reflections that highlighted the motion without demanding attention. From time to time, the squirrel paused, its nose lifting to catch the faint traces of air drifting from the hearth or the open window. The act of observing became part of the evening's ritual, a shared patience that required no words. Small objects, crumbs, shells, tiny fragments of paper, were offered, removed, or ignored according to the creature's own quiet decisions. The household waited, measured their gestures, and allowed the animal's choices to guide the flow of interaction. It was not a training in the modern sense, nor a practice of control, but a gentle shaping of habit and comfort. The squirrel learned to navigate the room with light steps, to pause where it was intended, to move without alarming the occupants. Each night added a subtle layer of confidence for the animal and the household alike, and in that quiet layering the boundaries between wild and domestic softened, as though each had agreed to coexist in unspoken understanding. Time passed with no sudden marks, no sense of urgency. Candlelight waned, shadows lengthened, and the stillness of the house carried through the room with a gentle insistence. The squirrel's movements became predictable in their rhythm, yet never mechanical. There was always the trace of independence in every pause, every turn of the head, every careful paw step along the polished surfaces. The environment provided a secure stage, but it was the patience of living beings, human and animal alike, that allowed the performance to continue. The room itself seemed to hold its breath in response. The grains of the walnut table appeared more pronounced in the soft glow, revealing the subtle curves and knots that told of their origin in the forest. Light from the candles reflected on the smooth surface, occasionally catching a tiny paw as it moved. The lace of the curtains swayed gently in the draft, brushing against the creature with soft insistence, yet leaving no mark. Even the walls, painted in muted tones, seemed to absorb the quietude, reflecting it back as a calm presence that extended beyond the room. Even as the hours passed, nothing demanded attention. The activity was minor, almost imperceptible, yet within it a sense of progression had begun. The squirrel's confidence grew, the household's observation deepened, and the room became a place where both could move in harmony. There was no hurry to reach a conclusion, no goal other than the continuation of the shared evening, the slow accumulation of comfort and trust. From the ledge to the table, from table to chair, the small journeys traced the contours of an interior that had become intimate without ceremony. Each surface encountered was met with a lightness that suggested respect rather than ownership. The act of offering, accepting, pausing, and retreating was not recorded or documented, but absorbed into the quiet pulse of the household. This gentle rhythm carried into every corner. The corners of the room remained shadowed, the small inkwells and papers undisturbed, the candles reflecting faint glimmers across polished wood. Even in the absence of sound, there was a sense of connection. The small creature moved, the household observed, and the space itself held both in balance. No sudden gesture broke the cadence. No element intruded upon the stillness. The progression of evenings, one into the next, allowed trust to solidify naturally, imperceptibly, like layers of mist settling upon a quiet pond. The candlelight, now leaning low in its holders, revealed the final details of this slow choreography. Shadows played across the walls and floors, stretching the familiar forms of chairs, tables, and bookshelves. The squirrel, moving with soft deliberation, paused near the edge of the table, then on the arm of a chair, then returned to the window ledge as if to confirm the boundary between worlds. Its small form was an echo of careful patience, a living reflection of the slow cadence the household had embraced. Even as night advanced, the room retained its gentle rhythm. Nothing was rushed, nothing forced. The act of learning, of moving, of accepting the light and shadow, the scent and texture of the space, continued quietly without endpoint. Within this stillness, there was no need for immediate action, no need for observation beyond what naturally occurred. The interior held room for these small steps, these subtle patterns, for as long as the evening would carry them. The promise of further practice lingered, unspoken but present. The next movement, the next gesture, the next tentative approach, would unfold as naturally as the first had. The environment, the candlelight, the furniture, and the patient occupants of the house all held the space for this progression. And within that holding, the art of gentle training, soft, deliberate, and patient, continued to grow layer upon layer, shaping confidence and trust without a single abrupt moment. The evening light settled into the room with a delicate persistence. Candle flames bent gently in the draft, spilling warm reflections over walnut tables and polished floors. In the soft illumination, small objects emerged as the subtle centers of attention. Cages, crafted from fine wood and thin wire, sat quietly on tables or near windows. Their design was simple yet precise, meant not to constrain, but to offer a defined space within which the small visitors could explore safely. Each cage, though modest in size, carried the imprint of care. The joins were smooth, the edges carefully sanded, and the hinges allowed doors to swing with a gentle motion, never abrupt. Alongside these enclosures were other instruments of attention. Tiny wheels turned slowly when the smallest paw pressed against them, their rotations almost imperceptible yet producing the faintest trace of sound, a subtle hum that mingled with the night air. Miniature objects, carefully constructed, dotted the surfaces of tables and shelves. There were small bowls, delicate ladders, and little platforms arranged with intention, each placed to encourage movement and exploration without demand. The room, already softened by candlelight, seemed to expand to accommodate these tiny interventions, creating a layered landscape in which light, shadow, and object met harmoniously. The squirrel, accustomed to the rhythm of prior evenings, approached each arrangement with deliberate caution. A paw rested briefly on the polished wood of a miniature ladder, and the tail, like a soft plume, balanced every micro-step. The candlelight reflected off the metal of the wheels and the thin wire of the cages, casting faint, shifting patterns on the surfaces below. The animal paused at each new object, sniffing the air and touching lightly with its nose before moving forward, its actions unhurried and intentional. In some corners of the room, multiple items were arranged as small courses of activity. A miniature platform led gently toward a low table, where a tiny dish held the remains of a nut or a fragment of dried fruit. These objects were not positioned to test or challenge, but to create gentle guidance. The household observed silently, hands poised lightly over the surfaces, never intruding, never forcing, simply allowing the natural curiosity of the small creature to trace the intended path. The cages themselves, though static, were more than containers. They were markers of routine. They defined space without restriction, their wire and wood conveying order while leaving freedom for movement within. A small door, opened and closed with care, allowed for entry and exit without alarm. From the first evenings, the squirrel had learned to recognize these boundaries, stepping in and out with soft deliberation. Each interaction reinforced the calm rhythm of trust that had begun along the window ledge and continued across tables and chairs. The miniature wheels, so delicate in appearance, offered subtle rewards for patience. A gentle touch set them turning, their motion both predictable and enchanting. The faint noise of rotation merged with the low flicker of candlelight, creating a quiet symphony of attention and observation. Every object in the room, though small, had weight in the quiet choreography of evening life. The presence of these items, carefully placed and maintained, shaped the space in ways that were almost imperceptible, yet profoundly supportive of the gentle routines taking place. Even as the hours progressed, the household's role remained one of still guidance. Hands rested lightly upon tables or chairs, never hovering in impatience, always observing with calm readiness. Objects were replaced, adjusted, or rotated, maintaining balance and variety in the environment. Each alteration was subtle, almost imperceptible, ensuring that the rhythm of exploration remained smooth and continuous. The room itself seemed to breathe alongside the candlelight, expanding and contracting with the quiet presence of small life. Occasionally, the squirrel would pause before a cage or a wheel, nose twitching as it considered the arrangement. Its gaze lingered over each miniature item, recognizing shape and texture, weighing the safest path forward. Then, without hurry, it would continue. The household watched with gentle attention, noting preferences and patterns, but never imposing expectation. This quiet observation became a shared rhythm, a dialogue without words or sound, held entirely in the measured movements of creature and caretaker alike. Beyond the immediate surfaces, the broader arrangement of the room contributed to the calm. Tables, chairs, and shelves framed open space, allowing for small journeys from one object to another. Shadows cast by candlelight lent depth to the interior, softening edges and emphasizing form. A bowl resting on the table caught a faint gleam, while a small ladder leaned at a gentle angle toward the back of a shelf, inviting the slightest climb. Every item, though unmoving on its own, carried subtle energy in the way it interacted with light, space, and presence. The miniature items also reflected care that extended beyond their immediate use. The tiny bowls were cleaned and replaced, the wheels oiled and adjusted to rotate smoothly, the cages dusted and aligned carefully against their surfaces. These rituals were unhurried, almost meditative, mirroring the stillness of the evenings themselves. Each gesture of maintenance reinforced the sense that the household and its small companions existed in a shared environment of calm attention. As night deepened, the flickering candlelight continued to illuminate the arrangement of objects and spaces. The squirrel's movements became more deliberate, tracing known paths with subtle variation. It stepped from cage to wheel to miniature platform with a rhythm that was neither hurried nor forced, embodying the quiet discipline of a home attuned to patience and observation. Each interaction left a trace of presence, not in disturbance, but in the gentle imprint of motion across polished wood and soft fabrics. The overall composition of room, candlelight, and miniature instruments suggested a choreography in which all elements participated without tension. Surfaces, shadows, and small creatures engaged in a careful, continuous dialogue. Even the smallest details, a slightly ajar door, the tilt of a platform, the angle of a ladder, contributed to the soft unfolding of evening activity. The entire scene remained enveloped in calm, a tableau in which each movement was welcomed and every pause honored. By the later hours, the objects had acquired an almost lifelike presence themselves. Cages seemed to wait patiently for occupants. Wheels leaned slightly as though anticipating a gentle touch. Miniature platforms and bowls existed as invitations, not commands, ready to receive small visitors who had come to understand the rhythm of the household. Within this quiet orchestration, trust and familiarity continued to expand, carried gently by the slow passing of evenings and the careful placement of every tiny object. The transition from window ledge to interior exploration was now seamless. The small creature's journey traced the contours of the space in a manner that appeared natural and unforced. The household observed with the soft awareness of someone witnessing a slow, unfolding ritual. No urgency intruded. No sudden movements broke the continuity of light, shadow, and presence. The evening progressed quietly, carrying forward the ongoing dialogue of stillness, movement, and shared time. The evening unfolded in gentle repetition, each candle casting its amber glow across polished wood and the muted tones of the room. The small creatures, already accustomed to the presence of human hands and quiet spaces, moved toward the places where nourishment awaited. Bowls of finely broken nuts, fragments of dried fruit, and occasionally softened grains rested upon low tables, each positioned with deliberation. The arrangement of food was neither hurried nor insistent. It existed as a quiet invitation, a gesture of patience rather than a demand. The squirrel approached a bowl with cautious certainty, its paws resting lightly on the edge as it tasted a fragment. The household had learned to place each morsel carefully, allowing the creature to explore the offering without intrusion. Candlelight shimmered upon the smooth surfaces of the bowls, catching flecks of nut or the faint sheen of fruit skin. Each movement of the small animal was measured, delicate, an echo of the slow rhythm of the room itself. Hands rested nearby, fingers barely moving above the surfaces, ready to intervene only if absolutely necessary. But intervention was rarely required. The creature's steps were gentle, guided by curiosity and the soft reassurance of repeated evenings. The practice of feeding had become a ritual, a quiet choreography in which both human and animal participants learned the contours of trust. No voice intruded, no sudden gesture startled. The motion of eating and observing unfolded as a natural extension of the room's calm. The placement of dishes, like the positioning of miniature ladders and platforms in previous evenings, was deliberate but understated. A small bowl might sit beside a candle, its reflection dancing across the polished table. Another dish rested near the edge of a low shelf, inviting careful exploration. From these simple arrangements, patterns emerged. The squirrel developed preferences and routines, choosing familiar spots for its evening meal, returning to the same surfaces night after night, each path etched lightly into the fabric of daily life. Evening care extended beyond feeding alone. Surfaces were gently cleared of crumbs, dishes refreshed, and small spaces tidied with unobtrusive attention. These actions reinforced a sense of order without imposing rigidity. The room remained fluid, adaptable, a space in which the animal could move freely while still guided by subtle cues of comfort and expectation. Shadows from flickering candles extended across the floorboards, highlighting grains of wood and delicate textures of fabric. Each element contributed to the soft, enveloping rhythm of the household. The scent of evening, burning wick, polished wood, faint traces of dried fruit, mingled with the cool breath of the night air drifting through slightly open windows. The squirrel's movements were deliberate and attentive, occasionally pausing to sniff or shift a paw with delicate precision. In these moments, the household observed quietly, noting small changes in posture or preference, but never intruding. The rhythm of care was measured and calm, a series of tiny gestures that collectively reinforced trust and the continuity of evening rituals. Occasionally, the small creature would pause between bites, raising its head to observe the room. Its dark eyes reflected the candlelight, capturing glimmers from polished surfaces and shadowed corners alike. The stillness of these pauses was mirrored by the household, whose hands remained motionless, observing without expectation. Each breath, each slight movement, seemed to ripple gently through the quiet of the evening, contributing to a shared serenity that spanned the small expanse of room and the larger realm of night beyond the windowpane. The act of feeding and attending to these small companions extended into subtle attentions that required no urgency. The edges of a bowl were checked for cleanliness, a few stray crumbs swept away with soft brushes of cloth, and the faint scent of fresh provisions mingled with the warm candle glow. All adjustments were made slowly, respecting the small creature's rhythm and maintaining the gentle pace that had been established across previous evenings. The routine, repeated night after night, developed an almost imperceptible cadence. Each placement of food, each careful adjustment of utensils and surfaces, contributed to a silent choreography. The squirrel moved along its chosen paths, stepping lightly from dish to platform, balancing its small weight with delicate control. Even the tiniest gestures, a tilt of the head, a careful paw, a flick of the tail, became part of the evolving pattern, each acknowledged quietly by the household's watchful but unobtrusive presence. Light, scent, and texture intertwined in the room, shaping an atmosphere of calm and constancy. The flickering candlelight accentuated the subtle sheen of polished wood and porcelain, highlighting textures without startling motion. The aroma of nuts, softened grains, and dried fruits lingered softly, melding with the cool night air to create an environment rich in sensory detail yet gentle enough not to disturb the prevailing tranquility. Observation became part of the ritual, as natural and unobtrusive as the act of eating itself. The household's gaze did not direct or command but merely witnessed. Every movement of the squirrel, every gentle choice of path or nibble of food, was absorbed into a quiet awareness, forming a connection as soft and unbroken as the candlelight that traced shadows across tables and floors. The room had become a space where the needs of small creatures and the intentions of caretakers existed in mutual balance, each reinforcing the calm of the other. Even as the hours waned, the ritual persisted. Bowls were refreshed, crumbs removed, surfaces adjusted with quiet patience. The squirrel's steps traced familiar paths, now marked by memory and gentle repetition. Its presence, once tentative and exploratory, now carried a quiet confidence, reinforced by the patient routines of feeding and care. The room itself seemed to breathe in harmony, its furnishings, shadows, and candlelight participating in a rhythm that neither hurried nor demanded, yet held the continuity of habit and trust. Through each small gesture, the household and its animal companions coexisted in a shared understanding. The rhythm of evening meals and attentive care wove a calm through the space, softening boundaries and sustaining quiet presence. Movement, reflection, and observation intertwined in gentle succession, leaving traces of patience and familiarity that would remain long after the candle flames burned low. Within this serene environment, the simple acts of feeding, tending, and waiting became a form of quiet dialogue. Nothing was forced, nothing was abrupt. The candlelight, the bowls, the polished wood, and the soft patter of small paws all contributed to a shared evening, uninterrupted and unhurried. Each repetition strengthened the sense of calm and allowed the routines to settle naturally into the unfolding night. The room itself seemed to take on a life of quiet intention. Candlelight, soft and unhurried, spilled across the polished surfaces of tables and chairs, reflecting gently in the corners where shadows stretched in delicate patterns. The arrangement of furniture, once simply functional, now formed a gentle landscape that invited exploration without demand. Low shelves offered small platforms, their edges rounded by careful hands, while narrow corridors between tables and cabinets guided movement almost imperceptibly. The space encouraged a natural rhythm, a slow passage from one familiar spot to another, allowing the small creature to navigate with ease and comfort. The squirrel moved lightly along the contours of this landscape, pausing where shadows softened or where the warm glow of candlelight illuminated a tiny platform. Its paws traced paths over smooth wood and soft fabrics, each step measured and deliberate. In its quiet exploration, the animal seemed to understand the room as more than mere walls and furniture. It was an environment shaped by intention, by patient care, and by the gentle consistency of repeated evenings. The angles of tables, the placement of chairs, even the soft incline of a window ledge contributed to a space that held both safety and subtle freedom. Light played a vital role in this quiet choreography. The flicker of flames cast shadows that shifted slowly across floors and walls, revealing textures in muted tones, highlighting grains of wood, or accentuating the soft weave of textiles. The interplay of light and shadow offered a constant, unobtrusive guide, a gentle signal to move, pause, or rest. The animal, attuned to these subtleties, responded instinctively, stepping onto illuminated surfaces or settling where shadows lent depth and quiet comfort. Windows allowed the outside night to mingle softly with the interior. A faint breeze carried the scent of distant trees and the coolness of evening air, brushing against the curtains in soft, irregular pulses. Through the glass, moonlight traced delicate patterns upon the floor, complementing the warm flicker of candlelight inside. The combination of inside and outside created a layered environment, one that balanced enclosure with openness, forming a gentle landscape for observation and movement. Each object within the room contributed to its slow, unfolding narrative. A small stool, placed at just the right distance from a table, offered a landing point for cautious steps. A pile of books, arranged in deliberate stacks, suggested boundaries without imposing them. Even the placement of a rug, its edges curling slightly with age, guided the path of tiny paws with subtle suggestion. Nothing was abrupt or demanding. Everything existed to facilitate gentle engagement with the space. The squirrel moved with quiet assurance, exploring the room as if reading a map laid out in wood, fabric, and light. Its small nose twitched with awareness, sensing textures and scents with precision. Each paw step carried a weight that was both present and light, leaving no mark beyond the memory of movement and the faint echo of careful motion. The room, in turn, responded in kind, the still surfaces reflecting, the shadows embracing, the light guiding without coercion. In corners, objects of interest offered variation. A miniature ladder leaned against a low shelf, inviting careful ascent. Bowls of food, previously arranged, awaited gentle attention. Small wheels turned silently when nudged, echoing the faint hum of past movement. Each item held the imprint of routine and care, contributing to a landscape that was rich yet restrained, full yet calm. The interplay of object, light, and motion shaped a narrative of slow unfolding, a map of evening life without hurry or insistence. The rhythm of the household continued to support this environment. Hands moved with care, adjusting candle positions, refreshing bowls, or straightening minor displacements. These interventions were soft, almost invisible, maintaining balance without disturbing the natural flow of activity. The room's elements remained in harmony, each piece contributing to an ongoing quiet dialogue between space, creature, and observer. Sounds, too, were part of the landscape. The soft scuff of small paws against polished surfaces, the gentle hum of a spinning wheel, the faint flicker and occasional sizzle of candle wicks, each contributed a layer of sensation that was subtle, steady, and non-intrusive. These auditory textures complemented the visual environment, reinforcing the rhythm of movement and pause that defined the evening. The room encouraged repeated patterns of behavior. Familiar routes emerged from candlelit corridors, gently angled shelves, and the placement of tiny objects. The squirrel traced these paths with attentive consistency, pausing at specific platforms or bowls, exploring surfaces as if they had stories embedded within their grains. Each exploration was self-directed yet harmonized with the soft structure of the space, creating an impression of calm continuity. Even as night deepened, the room's atmosphere remained unbroken. Shadows lengthened gradually, candlelight dimmed with patient slowness, and the small movements of the squirrel continued their unhurried rhythm. Every object, surface, and beam of light seemed to participate in a shared quiet, a landscape that acknowledged presence while offering freedom. There was no urgency, no demand, only a gentle encouragement to move, pause, and rest within the contours of the space. The interaction between creature and room suggested a subtle understanding of boundaries and possibilities. The squirrel navigated tables, chairs, and low shelves with a delicate awareness of weight, distance, and texture. It paused to observe reflections in polished surfaces, tilted its head toward faint sounds, and shifted positions in response to the gentle sway of curtains or the soft draft of air. Each gesture contributed to the continuing story of the space, its quiet pulse unfolding with the passing hours. In the quiet glow of candlelight, the room's arrangement and the small routines of its inhabitants became inseparable. The angles of furniture, the placement of miniature objects, the reach of shadow and light, all shaped a landscape that was simultaneously safe, intriguing, and calming. The small creature's movement traced this landscape in soft, deliberate patterns, each step reinforcing the unspoken order of the evening. As the night carried on, the space seemed to breathe alongside its inhabitants. The flicker of flame, the subtle motion of shadows, the tiny imprints of paws on polished wood, all harmonized into a continuous, gentle rhythm. This environment, shaped by care and observation, held within it the potential for quiet exploration, measured curiosity, and restful attention. The room maintained its gentle rhythm as the small creatures moved quietly among the carefully placed objects. The household, settled in various corners or near softly illuminated surfaces, participated without intrusion. Hands rested lightly on polished wood, fingers brushing only to adjust a miniature ladder or to steady a bowl, but always with deliberate slowness, as if time itself had extended its pace. Their presence was a quiet accompaniment, an unobtrusive guide through the measured hours of the evening, a silent witness to the subtle movements of paws, tail, and whiskers. The candlelight flickered softly, casting long, gentle shadows that shifted over walls, floors, and furniture. Each observer's gaze followed the rhythm of the tiny footsteps, tracing the delicate arcs of motion across the room. They noticed the way a squirrel paused at the edge of a miniature platform, hesitated just slightly before descending, and then moved on, each action unhurried and intentional. These observations required patience and calm, a quiet attention that did not seek to interfere but only to understand the rhythm that had naturally developed over evenings past. From their seated positions, the household could perceive the subtle interaction of light and shadow, how it played across the smooth surfaces of tables, the edges of rugs, and the gentle curves of small objects placed with care. Each flicker of flame highlighted textures, revealed grains in wood, and deepened the contours of the miniature landscape. The observers allowed their awareness to expand and soften with these visual cues, letting the space itself dictate the pace of attention. No gesture or glance was hurried. Every moment was measured and complete in itself, yet flowing seamlessly into the next. The squirrel's movements were precise and fluid, guided by curiosity rather than demand. They explored cages and ladders, nudged small bowls with delicate paws, and paused at the soft curves of platforms bathed in candlelight. The household, observing without pressing or directing, mirrored this calm. The quiet presence of attentive eyes and still hands became a kind of gentle companionship, an invisible thread that connected observer and observed, forming a shared experience in the soft glow of the evening. Breath mingled with the faint scent of candle wax and polished wood, weaving a background that neither intruded nor faded entirely. The observer's movements were almost imperceptible. A slight adjustment of a hand on a table, the careful tilt of a dish, the soft brush of fingertips across a miniature ladder. Each subtle action reinforced the rhythm of the evening without disturbing it, preserving the continuity of calm that had been established through countless nights. Occasionally, the squirrels would pause and lift their heads, sensing the presence of human eyes nearby. But the gaze was neither sharp nor insistent. It simply acknowledged the watchful calm, allowing the animals to continue their exploration with trust. Even in these pauses, time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat and twitch of a whisker carrying the slow pulse of the room, and the household remained still, offering a quiet, steady reassurance without need for sound or action. The faint scratch of tiny claws on wood, the gentle patter of movement across fabric, and the soft hum of rotating wheels formed a delicate symphony, harmonized by the calm presence of observers. Every sound was absorbed into the steady rhythm, no note louder than the next, each contributing to the continuity of evening practice. The household's attentiveness, almost meditative in its quietude, allowed the small creatures to move freely yet safely, weaving a subtle dialogue of motion, observation, and shared calm. Windows continued to offer glimpses of the night beyond, with silvered moonlight tracing patterns across floors and walls. The observers sometimes glanced toward these panes, noticing the slight sway of curtains or the subtle shift in reflected light, integrating these changes into their quiet attention. No movement was abrupt. The room adapted gradually, the candlelight merging with moonbeams to create gentle gradients of illumination. Shadows softened and shifted, accentuating textures and providing a layered backdrop for the still, attentive figures both large and small. As the hours progressed, the household's presence remained consistent yet unobtrusive. Hands moved lightly to adjust objects, refresh small dishes, or steady surfaces, each gesture minimal and considered. Eyes followed the rhythms of the animal's exploration without interfering, noting slight patterns of preference, cautious steps, or the smallest of pauses. The observation itself became part of the calm, a silent accompaniment that reinforced the tranquility of the environment. The quiet presence encouraged subtle discovery. Squirrels investigated the edges of tables, brushed against the sides of low chairs, and explored soft folds of fabric, each movement precise and deliberate. Observers noted these choices without comment, allowing the animal's natural curiosity to dictate their path. The candlelight shimmered along these interactions, highlighting tiny details: a paw's careful touch, a whisker's slight twitch, a tail curling in measured motion, and each moment became part of the continuing story of evening life. Even when a small creature paused to rest, lowering its body against the smooth surface of a shelf or curling near a softly illuminated bowl, the household maintained its calm attention. Fingers hovered without contact, eyes followed without intrusion. The room, the objects, and the living beings within it existed in a harmonious rhythm that did not require active guidance. Observation itself became an act of gentle participation, a quiet recognition of presence that enriched the shared experience without altering it. The hours deepened and the candle flames wavered in their holders, elongating shadows across walls and floors. The squirrel's motions continued, alternating between exploration and brief stillness, tracing paths that had become familiar yet always contained subtle variations. The household adapted to these small shifts, their attention flowing with the pace of movement, responsive yet non-intrusive, maintaining the continuity of calm that defined the room. Each gesture, each pause, each subtle interaction contributed to the layered texture of the evening. The presence of attentive observers lent a sense of security without imposition. Their quietness amplified the soft rhythm of the room, the gentle illumination of candlelight, and the careful movements of the small creatures. The evening existed as a continuous, unbroken space of observation, reflection, and calm, where presence was gentle and action was measured. In this shared quiet, the household and the small creatures coexisted in a delicate balance. The room, filled with light, shadow, objects, and movement, became a living canvas of unhurried attention. Every glance, every soft gesture, every careful paw step was part of a sustained harmony, a rhythm that neither demanded nor startled, but simply allowed time and motion to flow together in a gentle evening dance. As the night deepened, a gentle stillness settled across the room, yet it was not a silence that halted motion. The candles, their flames wavering in measured rhythm, cast elongated shadows along polished wood and worn fabric, each flicker revealing textures anew. The small creatures moved softly, tracing familiar routes but pausing in new patterns, guided by curiosity as much as by habit. The observers, seated in quiet corners or near softly illuminated surfaces, allowed their awareness to stretch and soften, following the gentle flow of time without intrusion. The subtle shifts of light marked the passage of hours. Moonlight, diffused through slightly open windows, mingled with candle glow, creating gradients that changed imperceptibly. Shadows lengthened along walls, stretched across floors, and bent gently around low furniture. Each transformation was delicate, inviting attention without demand, a slow rhythm that the household and its tiny companions both absorbed and reflected. The room seemed to breathe in these movements, the air carrying faint scents of wax, polished wood, and dried fruits mingled with cool night breezes, layering the senses in quiet continuity. The squirrels moved with patient attentiveness. Paw steps were deliberate, tail movements measured, whiskers twitching softly as they navigated the subtle contours of tables, shelves, and miniature platforms. Even in moments of stillness, when the creatures rested upon the edges of low surfaces or nestled near softly illuminated bowls, their presence contributed to the ongoing harmony of the room. Each pause, each careful adjustment of weight, was noted by the household without comment or intrusion, becoming part of a shared rhythm that neither hurried nor demanded. Small changes in the environment punctuated the long night. A flickering flame cast a new shadow across a stack of books, the draft from a slightly ajar window shifted the folds of a curtain, and the sheen of polished wood caught the diffused light differently. These subtle movements invited the creatures to explore slightly altered paths or to linger in new nooks, all without breaking the calm that had been established. Observers' hands adjusted objects lightly, repositioning a bowl or tilting a miniature ladder, their gestures slow and deliberate, ensuring continuity rather than interruption. Sound joined the interplay of light and shadow. The faint patter of tiny claws against wood, the soft rustle of fabric as creatures shifted, and the almost inaudible creak of a slowly turning wheel created a delicate symphony. Each note was low and unobtrusive, blending into the atmosphere rather than drawing attention. The household absorbed these sounds into their quiet attentiveness, allowing them to shape the flow of time as gently as the shifting illumination. Even the smallest sensory details were part of the evening's subtle choreography. A soft clink as a dish was nudged, The whisper of air across a slightly open window, the gentle tap of a paw against a polished surface, all became part of the layered experience. Observers remained present without insistence, their awareness stretching alongside the slow shifts of the environment. The creatures, attuned to both the subtle motion of the room and the calm presence of the humans, continued to explore, rest, and move with deliberate tranquility. Patterns of movement emerged naturally. Familiar routes across tables, around chairs, and along shelves repeated with minor variation, their rhythm maintained by soft observation and the gentle guidance of light and object placement. No instruction was given, yet the creature's motions harmonized with the environment, creating a continuous flow of quiet activity. Observers' eyes followed these movements, noticing small changes, the tilt of a head, the twitch of a paw, the slight adjustment in a resting position, but never directing or interrupting. The passing hours transformed the room gradually. Candle flames dimmed and rose, flickering shadows stretched longer and softened further, and the air seemed to thicken slightly with the weight of night. The squirrels, moving between food bowls, miniature ladders, and low platforms, mirrored this tempo, their activity slowing naturally as their bodies adapted to the subtle cues of the environment. Observers, fully attuned to the passage of time, allowed the space to guide them, adjusting objects only to maintain balance or to refresh familiar routines, never to disrupt the gentle unfolding. In these long nights, there was a continuous dialogue of attention and calm. Each small gesture, paw step, tail flick, flickering flame, whispered draft, interacted with the next in a sequence that was both predictable and infinitely nuanced. Observers' presence reinforced this rhythm, their quiet awareness harmonizing with the soft movements of the creatures and the shifting patterns of light and shadow. The room itself became a living canvas, where time, space, and movement blended into an unbroken current of gentle continuity. The subtle shifts carried an almost hypnotic quality. Shadows stretched and curved, surfaces reflected light in ever-changing patterns, and the creatures adapted with graceful precision. Observers remained motionless when needed, moving only to support the established balance, their hands light and deliberate, their gaze soft and continuous. Each transition in the room, whether a slight change in illumination or a careful repositioning of a miniature object, was absorbed seamlessly, forming a quiet tapestry of motion and stillness, light and shadow, presence and observation. The continuity of long nights fostered a calm patience, a deepening of routine that required neither words nor urgency. The creatures, the room, and the household coexisted in a slow, steady rhythm, each contributing to a sense of enduring tranquility. Paw steps traced subtle arcs along polished wood and soft fabric, small bodies paused under diffused light, and observers' quiet attention wove alongside these movements, completing an evening rich in gentle texture yet unassuming in presence. As the night extended toward its deepest hours, every element remained in dialogue. Candlelight softened further, shadows stretched into muted gradients, and the creature's motions became even more measured. Observers' presence, consistently unobtrusive, offered reassurance without command. Each movement and stillness was acknowledged without interference, contributing to a continuous, flowing narrative of calm and subtle change. The room, alive with delicate shifts and quiet rhythms, held a sense of timelessness. Observers, creatures, and environment intertwined in soft, unhurried choreography, where no gesture was excessive and no moment was omitted. The long night moved forward slowly, carrying all present in its gentle current, each pause, step, and flicker of light reinforcing the enduring serenity of the space. The room had settled into a deeper, more measured quiet as the long night continued. Candle flames wavered gently, their light softening further, brushing over familiar surfaces with muted warmth. Shadows stretched longer, flowing across walls, furniture, and small objects placed carefully over the hours. The creatures moved more slowly now, their steps lighter, each pause lasting slightly longer than before. Their curiosity had diminished to gentle exploration, and sometimes they simply rested, paws tucked beneath them, eyes half closed, observing the subtle interplay of light and shadow without urgency. Observers remained quietly attentive, though their focus had softened, guided by the diminishing movements of the animals. Hands rested lightly on the edge of tables or upon the smooth curves of small objects, adjusting nothing unless the balance of the room required it. Eyes followed the soft arcs of movement, noting when a paw lifted or a tail swayed, but never pressing the rhythm of the night to hurry. Everything had slowed, each detail blending into the calm fabric of the evening, allowing the sense of time to drift along gentle currents. The air held a soft warmth from candles and the faint hint of wax, mingled with the cooler breath of the night seeping through slightly open windows. A delicate draft moved the curtains in measured waves, creating fleeting shapes and patterns on walls and floors. The creatures, nestled in small corners or atop low platforms, occasionally shifted their weight or stretched lightly, adjusting to the room's subtle changes. Each movement was absorbed by the space around them, the household's presence maintaining a calm, unobtrusive continuity. Sounds had dwindled to the faintest whispers, the soft tap of claws against polished wood, the gentle rustle of fabric as creatures repositioned themselves, the occasional sigh of a wooden floor settling under still weight. These minimal noises wove together with the fading light, forming a quiet rhythm that was almost imperceptible, yet undeniably present. Observers became attuned to this rhythm, their awareness flowing with it, rather than seeking to influence or direct it. The candlelight continued its gentle dance, elongating shadows further while diffusing into pools of soft illumination. Each object in the room took on a slightly different appearance, the subtle highlights and shadows creating quiet depth. Small dishes, miniature ladders, and other objects placed for the creature's exploration reflected the dim light, their textures softened, their edges less pronounced. The room seemed to exhale slowly, embracing the stillness and the delicate balance between movement and rest. Squirrels would occasionally raise their heads, eyes reflecting the faint candlelight, but they no longer scuttled with the lively curiosity of earlier hours. Instead, their movements were deliberate and unhurried, paw steps softened, tails curling and uncurling with rhythmic ease. Some chose to settle atop familiar surfaces, curling lightly as the candlelight shifted across their small forms. Observers' attention followed without insistence, a silent acknowledgement of presence that reinforced the peaceful tempo of the night. Even the subtle nuances of the room, the shift of shadows, the soft play of candlelight across walls, the gentle sway of curtains, became a companion to rest. Observers allowed their awareness to expand over these changes, absorbing them without thought or effort. Every minor movement, every faint sound, every fleeting change in illumination was noted gently, not as an interruption but as a continuation of the evening's calm. The slow rhythm of the room carried all within it forward, minute by minute, hour by hour, toward an eventual quiet. As the night progressed further, the room's atmosphere thickened with the sensation of enduring calm. The creature's motions diminished to small, delicate adjustments, sometimes a lift of a paw, a slight turn of the head, or a gentle stretch across a miniature platform. Their curiosity had softened entirely into a restful presence. Observers remained present, their attention steady yet light, moving only when necessary to maintain the subtle balance, such as tilting a candle to provide an even glow or repositioning a small dish. The air seemed to carry time itself slowly forward, measured not by hours or minutes, but by the soft cadence of breathing, light, and movement. Shadows drifted across walls with a liquid grace, flowing from one surface to another, pooling near corners, then dispersing again. The creatures shifted their weight lightly, their small bodies reflecting and absorbing the soft light, while observers' hands, resting gently near them, mirrored the slow rhythm of the night. Every aspect of the space, the worn textures of furniture, the polished wood surfaces, the muted patterns of fabric, and the careful arrangement of objects, participated in this quiet unfolding. Observers' eyes traced the contours, shadows, and surfaces, noting subtle changes without thought or expectation. The room seemed alive with gentle detail, yet remained perfectly still, as if the very air had adapted to the quiet presence of its inhabitants. Soft, intermittent noises punctuated the otherwise still atmosphere. A tiny scratch as claws met wood, the whisper of fabric as a small body shifted, a faint sigh of air through the slightly open window. Each sound, though minimal, was absorbed into the overarching calm, a part of the continuing narrative of the evening. Observers' attention flowed seamlessly with these sounds, a silent acknowledgement that reinforced rather than altered the pace of the night. Gradually, the room's illumination softened even further. Candlelight dimmed toward its final hours, shadows blended more fully, and the creatures nestled completely into their chosen corners and surfaces. The household remained quietly attentive, letting time itself govern the evening's rhythm. Their presence was constant yet unobtrusive, a steady undercurrent that supported the delicate balance of light, movement, and rest. In this lingering calm, every detail of the room, the gentle sway of curtains, the softened glow on surfaces, the subtle shift of small creatures, became part of a slow, continuous pattern. Each moment merged with the next, forming a seamless thread of evening life. Observers' attention and the creature's gentle movements created a quiet tapestry of calm, guiding the room into deeper serenity while preserving the ongoing rhythm of the long night. As the final hours approached, the room seemed to breathe as one. Light and shadow, motion and stillness, observation and presence all intertwined into a cohesive, tranquil flow. Every subtle change, every faint movement, every glimmer of reflection was absorbed without interruption, forming the quiet, measured pulse of the closing night. The room had descended into a profound quiet, a gentle hush that seemed to drape over every surface and inhabitant. Candle flames had dwindled to faint glimmers, their glow brushing soft highlights along the worn wood of tables and shelves. Shadows had blurred into long, indistinct forms, pooling near corners and stretching across surfaces in fluid, unhurried arcs. The creatures, now mostly nestled upon their favored perches or softly padded areas, had slowed their motions to occasional stretches or subtle shifts of position, curling themselves into the gentle folds of fabric or the soft curves of miniature platforms. Observers sat or leaned quietly, their attention softened to a tranquil haze, eyes following no particular movement, aware only of the room as a whole. Their hands rested lightly on nearby surfaces, occasionally adjusting a small object or tilting a candle to catch the faint light, but these movements were slow, considered, and part of the ongoing rhythm. Even the smallest sound, the rustle of fur against fabric, a quiet tap of claws on polished wood, or the whisper of air through the slightly open window, was absorbed without thought, merging into a continuous hum of calm. The air itself seemed to thicken with stillness, carrying faint scents of candle wax, polished wood, and the soft trace of dried fruits left near feeding bowls. The slightest draft shifted curtains in gentle waves, creating ephemeral patterns of shadow and illumination. Moonlight pooled across the floor, diffused and softened by the night, blending seamlessly with the remaining candlelight to create an atmosphere that was both intimate and expansive. Each subtle change in light or shadow was a quiet companion to the rest of the room, guiding attention without urging it, moving through space and time like a slow, deliberate breath. The creature's movements were now infrequent, almost imperceptible, as though the room itself invited them to remain still. Occasionally, a small paw would twitch or a tail would curl slightly, following the delicate traces of light across a surface, but there was no haste, no urgency. Observers allowed themselves to be absorbed in this calm, their gaze soft, their breathing slow and steady, harmonizing with the gentle rhythm of the night. Every gesture, every shift, was part of a fluid continuum, each moment flowing into the next without interruption. Sounds were scarce, delicate, and fading. The faint tapping of claws, a muted scrape of wood, the soft sigh of air moving through the windows, these minimal noises wove together into a tapestry of serene presence. There was no demand for attention, no need to interpret or respond. Instead, each sound became a part of the overarching stillness, a subtle accompaniment to the quiet unfolding of the room's evening life. Observers' awareness moved with these sounds, a calm, steady current that echoed the slow, unhurried tempo of all within the space. As hours passed, shadows softened further, pooling into gentle gradients that blurred the boundaries between surfaces. Candlelight diminished to near invisibility, leaving behind traces of warmth in the texture of wood, fabric, and paper. Moonlight provided the faintest touch of illumination, enough to mark outlines, to hint at textures, and to allow the room to remain alive with quiet detail, without disturbing the prevailing calm. Each tiny reflection and flicker became part of a slow visual rhythm, a subtle narrative of light and stillness that invited unforced observation. The creatures had curled into positions of rest, their forms small and composed, yet fully present in the room's quiet expanse. Observers' eyes lingered on these subtle details, taking in the curve of a tail, the tilt of a head, the way a paw rested lightly upon a surface. These small elements, repeated across hours, became soothing markers of continuity, a soft cadence in the uninterrupted flow of night. Movements, when they occurred, were deliberate and minimal, carefully orchestrated by instinct and habit rather than by curiosity or urgency. The room itself seemed to embody the passing of time through these quiet rhythms, Surfaces absorbed the faint traces of light, shadows blended imperceptibly, and every object seemed to rest in its assigned place, supporting the gentle flow of the evening. Observers' presence, continuous yet unobtrusive, reinforced this balance, their hands moving only to maintain the alignment of small items, their gaze resting lightly on details without fixation. Time became almost weightless, measured only by the soft pulse of presence and observation, the faint echo of movement, and the subtle glow of dying candlelight. In this final stage of night, the atmosphere exuded a delicate patience, a quiet promise of rest that required nothing from anyone within it. Every shift in shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper of movement was absorbed into the room's ongoing stillness. The creatures lay in positions of quiet repose, their breathing slow and measured, their tiny forms blending into the textures and tones of their surroundings. Observers mirrored this calm, the ebbing of attention into an effortless awareness that required no effort, no thought, only gentle presence. The faint interplay of light and shadow continued its gradual dance, now almost imperceptible. The room seemed to breathe as one entity, soft, rhythmic, and entirely unhurried. Observers allowed themselves to become part of this flow, eyes closing momentarily or following the slow arcs of illumination and shade. The subtle shifting of air, the quiet settling of surfaces, and the occasional faint sound of a creature's movement were all woven into a single, continuous fabric of calm. As the night approached its quietest hours, every element, the softened glow of candle remnants, the diffused moonlight, the sleeping creatures, and the still observers, converged into a seamless whole. There was no distinction between motion and stillness, presence and observation, light and shadow. All became part of a single rhythm, slow, gentle, and unbroken, inviting the room and its inhabitants into a profound restfulness. The final hours carried a sense of drifting, a suspension of time in which every minor detail, every flicker, shift, or sigh, was acknowledged softly, without effort and without demand. Observers and creatures alike seemed to dissolve into the calm, existing only as part of the slow, continuous passage of night. The room itself felt as though it had exhaled, surrendering fully to the tranquility that had been nurtured throughout the evening. And in this lingering hush, with shadows merged and light softened to almost imperceptible traces, the gentle rhythm of night carried on, a quiet current guiding all present toward sleep, toward rest, and toward the serene continuation of time. You don't need to keep listening anymore. The story can fade into the background now, becoming softer with every moment. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. There's no rush and nothing you need to remember. Just let your breathing slow down. Let your thoughts drift where they want to go. And allow the quiet of this night to settle around you. This story will remain here, gently playing while you rest. Tomorrow night, a new night will be waiting for you, and it's one you won't want to miss. And if sleep hasn't arrived just yet, you can quietly return to one of the previous nights, and let those stories guide you instead. For now, sleep well.